My name is Ethan Mercer. 3 years ago, my wife and I bought our first house together in western Pennsylvania. It wasn't a fixer-upper. It wasn't abandoned. The inspection came back clean. We thought we got lucky. Looking back, I think somebody was already living there. The first week was normal. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. 2 stories, built in the late 1980s. We spent our evenings unpacking boxes and arguing over where furniture should go. Then one night, around 11 p.m., I heard a noise above our bedroom. Not a creak, not settling. A thump, like someone had dropped something in the attic. I froze and listened. Nothing else happened. I figured a squirrel had gotten in somehow. The next morning, I checked outside for damage, but didn't find anything. I forgot about it. 2 nights later, it happened again. 3 thumps. Slow and deliberate. My wife heard it too. She asked if I wanted to check the attic. I grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder in the hallway. The attic was empty. At least it looked empty. Insulation, wood beams, storage space. Nothing unusual. I climbed back down, feeling stupid. For a few days, everything was quiet again. Then we started noticing small things. Food disappearing. Nothing major. A few slices of bread. Granola bars. Half a package of cookies. At first, we blamed each other. I accused my wife of late-night snacking. She accused me. Neither of us admitted to it because neither of us had done it. One Saturday morning, I found a dirty coffee mug sitting in the sink. The problem was, I had gone to bed after washing every dish in the house. I remember standing there staring at it. My wife swore she hadn't used it. I believed her, but I didn't have another explanation. That night, I locked every door and window before bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing water. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard movement upstairs. Our attic access was directly above me. Something scraped across wood, slowly, like furniture being dragged. I stood there listening. Then it stopped. The next day, I bought motion sensors. Nothing fancy, just a few battery-powered units. I placed one near the attic ladder and another in the upstairs hallway. The first night, they stayed silent. The second night, at 3:17 a.m., one of them went off. A loud electronic chirp exploded through the house. I jumped out of bed. My wife woke up screaming. The sensor above the hallway was flashing red. I grabbed a baseball bat and turned on every light. Nothing. No intruder. No open doors. No broken windows. But when I checked the attic ladder, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The ladder wasn't fully closed. It was hanging down about an inch. I knew I had pushed it shut before bed. I was certain. I climbed up. The attic looked empty again, until my flashlight landed on something tucked behind insulation. A sleeping bag. I just stood there. My brain couldn't process it. There shouldn't have been a sleeping bag in my attic. I pulled the insulation aside. Underneath was a plastic tote. Inside were water bottles, food wrappers, a flashlight, batteries, and a small portable radio. Someone had been staying there. Recently, I nearly fell off the ladder getting down. We called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived and searched the house, the attic, the garage, the yard, everything. Nobody was there. They told us it was possible a squatter had been living in the house before we bought it and left after realizing people had moved in. That explanation should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because whoever had been up there knew the layout of our house. They had watched us. The police collected everything and left. For the first time since moving in, I couldn't sleep. The following week was quiet. No noises, No missing food, no motion sensor alerts. I started convincing myself it was over. Then came the photograph. I got home from work before my wife. There was a single printed photo sitting on our kitchen counter. No envelope, no note, just a photo. It showed our bedroom, taken from the attic access opening. The timestamp on the image was from 2 weeks earlier. My wife and I were asleep in bed. I felt physically sick. The police returned and took the photograph. They dusted for prints, nothing useful. A detective later told me the picture was likely taken by the same person who had been living above us. The person had apparently been entering our house while we slept. What terrified me most wasn't the photo. It was what the detective said next. He asked if we'd ever noticed our attic hatch open during the day. I told him no. He nodded and said, "Then he was probably climbing down after you went to sleep." I didn't sleep in that house for a month. Eventually, we installed cameras everywhere. One facing the attic ladder, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen. Nothing ever appeared. No one returned. At least, not that we know of. A year later, while renovating, I discovered something hidden behind a wall panel in the attic. A narrow space between two beams. Inside was a notebook. Most of the pages were blank, except for one sentence written over and over again. The same sentence repeated dozens of times. "I lived here first." We moved out 6 months later. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was trauma, but I could never shake the feeling that every night we spent in that house, someone had been listening from directly above our heads. My name is Tyler Bennett. Last year, my girlfriend and I bought a house outside of Columbus, Ohio. It was our first home together. Nothing fancy, just an older 2-story house with a finished basement and a big backyard. The previous owner had moved out quickly after a divorce. That's what our realtor told us. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal. Then one morning, I found the basement door open. I was positive I had shut it the night before. The door led to a staircase that went down to the finished basement. It wasn't creepy or unfinished. We had a couch down there and planned to make it a movie room. I figured I had simply forgotten to close it. That night before bed, I made a point of shutting it. The next morning it was open again. This time my girlfriend noticed too. She asked if the house had some kind of airflow issue. I said maybe, but the door was heavy. It didn't just drift open. A few nights later, I woke up around 2 a.m. I needed water and walked into the hallway. The basement door was standing wide open. I stopped. I knew it had been closed. I stared down the dark staircase. Then I heard a sound, a single footstep, from below. I immediately turned on every light in the house. The basement was empty. At least that's what it looked like. I searched every room. Nothing. The next day, I installed a cheap camera facing the basement door. 3 nights later, I got a motion alert while at work. I opened the app, expecting to see my girlfriend. Instead, I watched the basement door slowly open by itself. No one was visible. The door simply swung inward. I showed the footage to my girlfriend. She looked genuinely scared. That night, neither of us slept much. Around midnight, we heard something fall downstairs. A loud crash. I grabbed a flashlight and went down. A cardboard box had been knocked off a shelf. What bothered me wasn't the box. It was the muddy footprint beside it. One footprint, fresh. Neither of us had been in the basement all day. Now I was convinced someone had gotten into the house. I checked every window and door. Everything was locked. The police came out and searched the property. They found nothing. One officer suggested maybe a homeless person had been sneaking in somehow, but there was no obvious entry point. For a week, things were quiet. Then my girlfriend called me at work. She sounded terrified. She said she'd heard someone coughing in the basement, not once, repeatedly, like someone trying to suppress it. I left work immediately. When I got home, she was waiting outside in her car. Neither of us wanted to go inside. The police searched again. Again, they found nobody. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So, after everyone went to bed, I reviewed old footage from the camera. I almost wish I hadn't. At 3:11 a.m., on a recording from 2 nights earlier, the basement door opened. A man stepped into view. He wasn't entering the basement. He was coming out of it. He stood there for nearly 20 seconds, staring directly toward the camera. Then he walked upstairs. My heart nearly stopped. I checked the rest of the footage. 4 minutes later, he returned, carrying something from our kitchen. Food. He went back downstairs. The police took the footage very seriously this time. The next day, they brought additional officers. One of them discovered something hidden behind a wall panel in the basement storage room. The panel wasn't original. Someone had modified it years ago. Behind it was a narrow crawl space running beneath part of the house. There was bedding inside, food wrappers, water bottles, a flashlight, and fresh cigarette butts. Someone had been living there. The officers searched the crawl space and eventually found the man hiding at the far end. According to police, he had once rented the house years earlier. After losing the property, he secretly kept access to the hidden space. Nobody knows exactly how long he'd been staying there. What still bothers me is something one of the officers said afterward. He told me they found evidence that the man wasn't just coming out at night. He'd been leaving the crawl space during the day too. Sometimes while we were both at work. Sometimes while only my girlfriend was home. We sold the house 8 months later. To this day, whenever I walk past a basement door left open, I think about that footage. The way he stood there staring into the camera, like he wasn't surprised we were living in his house, like he was waiting for us to leave. My name is Brandon Hayes. 2 years ago, my wife and I bought a house in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. One of the reasons we loved the place was that it backed up to a large wooded area. The only house nearby was an old 2-story home, about 50 yards away across a field. According to our realtor, nobody lived there. The owner had died years earlier, and the property had been tied up in legal disputes ever since. The house sat empty, or so we thought. The first week after moving in, I noticed a light on in one of the upstairs windows. I assumed someone from the bank or the family was checking on the property. The next night, the light was on again. Same room, same window. Then it disappeared. I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I got home from work after dark. As I pulled into the driveway, I looked toward the abandoned house. There was a figure standing in the upstairs window, just standing there. I couldn't make out any details because of the distance. I stared for a few seconds. Then the figure slowly stepped away from the window. I told my wife about it. She said maybe someone had finally moved in. That sounded reasonable. For a while, I accepted that explanation. Then one Saturday morning, I was mowing the lawn. I happened to glance toward the old house. The same upstairs window was open. A man was standing there watching me, not casually, not looking around. watching me. The second I looked up and made eye contact, he disappeared from the window. Something about it bothered me. I don't know why. Maybe because most people wave. Maybe because the house was supposedly empty. That night before bed, I looked out our bedroom window. The upstairs light was on again, and the man was back, standing in the exact same spot, watching our house. I shut the blinds. The next morning, I decided to talk to one of my neighbors, an older man who had lived on the road for decades. When I mentioned the house, he looked confused. He told me nobody had lived there in years. I explained about the lights and the man in the window. His expression changed immediately. He asked which room. When I pointed to the upstairs window, he got quiet. Then he said something that made me uncomfortable. That light shouldn't even work. According to him, the power to the house had been shut off long ago. I laughed it off. I figured he was mistaken. But later that evening, I drove past the property. The electric meter had been removed. The house genuinely had no power. Yet that night, the upstairs room was glowing again. At that point, I started feeling uneasy. A few nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then I heard footsteps, slow footsteps, crossing my backyard. I looked out the window. Nothing. The motion light hadn't come on. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed movement near the tree line. Someone was standing there, watching the house. My heart started racing. The person was too far away to identify, but I knew exactly where they were facing. Toward my bedroom window. I woke my wife. By the time I looked back, the figure was gone. The next day, I installed cameras. Front yard, backyard, driveway, everything. For almost a week, nothing happened. Then one morning I reviewed footage after receiving a motion alert overnight. The alert triggered at 2:43 a.m. A person entered the frame from the woods. He stood motionless near our shed for nearly 3 minutes. Then he walked back toward the abandoned house. The camera never caught his face, only a dark silhouette. I immediately called the sheriff's department. An officer came out and reviewed the footage. He agreed it was suspicious. Later that afternoon, 2 deputies went to check the abandoned property. They called me a few hours later. They wanted me to come identify something. When I arrived, multiple police vehicles were already there. The deputies had entered the house through an unlocked rear door. Inside, they found signs that someone had been living there. Recent food, bottled water, blankets, flashlights, a portable generator. The upstairs room I'd been seeing was powered by a battery-powered work light. But that wasn't why they called me. One deputy led me upstairs. The room was nearly empty except for a folding chair, positioned directly in front of the window, facing my house. Next to the chair was a pair of binoculars and a notebook. The notebook contained dates, times, descriptions, hundreds of entries. Most of them were about my wife and me, what time we left for work, when we returned, which rooms we spent time in, when lights turned on and off, how many guests visited. The deputy closed the notebook and told me I didn't need to read anymore. I asked if they had caught the guy. He said no. The house was empty when they arrived. The man had vanished. For the next month, patrol cars regularly drove through the neighborhood. Nothing happened. No lights, no figures in the windows, no movement on the cameras. Then one night, I got another motion alert. I opened the app expecting the worst. Instead, I saw a single image. Someone standing directly in front of my back door, close enough for the camera to finally capture details. It wasn't the man from the abandoned house. It was a woman, an elderly woman. She was staring straight into the camera. Then she held up a piece of paper. Written across it were 4 words. "He knows you called." The police never found her. They never found the man either. A month later, investigators discovered both had been living in various abandoned properties throughout the county. By then, my wife wanted out. Honestly, so did I. We sold the house the following spring. What still bothers me is the notebook. Not because someone had been watching us, but because the entries started months before we bought the house. Whoever was living there wasn't watching us specifically. They were watching anyone who moved in, and I still have no idea why.